Thank you for joining us. This is the InfoWars Nightly News. I'm Darren McBreen, and I have a question for you. How do you feel, or what do you do when you see a police car in your rearview mirror? Do you feel safe, or do you feel threatened? And what were you to do if a police car were to pull you over? Do you know your rights? We're joined now by Eddie Craig from Rule of Law of Radio. He's going to break down some of the do's and don'ts, what you can and can't say, or what you shouldn't say when you're pulled over or confronted by law enforcement. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Let's start from the beginning. Flashing lights in my rearview mirror, getting pulled over. What are my rights at that point?
Well, your rights don't ever change. Whether you're being pulled over or not, the rights we have are inherent, unalienable rights. They belong to all of us. What we have to do is know what they are and when to invoke them in the presence of our public servants. When this police officer is initiating a traffic stop, he is operating under certain presumptions. One, that you are actually engaging in a regulable activity known as transportation. He got that premise based upon the fact that you have inspection stickers and license plates on your car. Because of that, he feels he has the authority to enforce these transportation regulations against you as a matter of course. Now, when you're pulled over, the last thing in the world you want to do is engage the officer in conversation. He is not your friend. Now, that's not to say he's a bad guy, but his job is to gather information and evidence for the purposes of his criminal investigation. And if he can engage you in conversation and get you to willingly and knowingly divulge information in a voluntary manner, then he is free to use that information against you later in a court of law.
And do they try to trick you into that as well? I mean, they know that better than you do, so they try to get you to divulge as much information as possible.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's exactly why it is a very fatal mistake as far as your case would be and your defense would go to engage in loose conversation with the officer.
Sure.
He is trained to interrogate. He is trained to ask questions that will make them seem innocent enough that you see no harm in answering them, when in fact exactly the opposite is true. A good example would be the terminology they use to describe what you were doing. I noticed that your vehicle was being operated at an excess speed. Right there, he has attempted to get you to admit on the record that, one, you were operating a vehicle. Those terms are specifically related to the acts of transportation, which is a commercial activity. And what he's doing is he is leading you down the rosy pathway of admitting that you're engaging in the activity, even if you aren't. But since most people take words and phrases with which they are readily familiar and presume that they understand their meaning when they hear them, no matter the source, their mistake is that presumption. A term or phrase used in law will almost never have the same meaning that you or I are commonly familiar with.
Correct.
In fact, it's a 100% guarantee that if a word or phrase is defined in statutory law, then it absolutely is not being used in the common and ordinary manner. If it were, there would not be a reason or need to redefine it, now would there?
Well, okay, what about this, though? But they start asking you questions. The first thing they ask, may I see your license, registration? Do you ask them, am I suspected of a crime? Or you have the right to say, why did you pull me over?
Well, there are several things you can say, and in my classes I teach people to basically, until they learn the concept, they are to ask 3 questions and 3 questions only. The first one being, what is the emergency and how can I help? The reason for that question is very simple. The officer has activated his MARS lighting system, which I say stands for More Annual Revenue System. But he uses that to declare an emergency reason for why he's stopping you. So our question is innocent enough because we're not going to presume or assume that we did anything wrong. We didn't. He's trying to enforce a statute against us that only applies to certain classes of people in a regulable activity, and we're not in that activity. So his attempt to regulate us is out of hand anyway. So we didn't violate anything that we should feel guilty about. So that first question is asked to set that tone. The second question you ask is, am I under arrest? Now the reason for that is you want the officer to tell you whether you are or you aren't, or you are or aren't under arrest. And the reason there is simple enough. The courts say that these officers can pull you over for the purpose of an investigative detention. Well, I don't see that in the Fourth Amendment anywhere, but that's how they want to do it. So going by the court's declaration, we then come to the point of asking, am I under arrest, to get the officer to attempt to give him an opportunity to admit that we are. Texas law is very clear. Chapter 543 of the Transportation Code calls these traffic stops a warrantless arrest, and that the officer may only release the person arrested from custody if the person will sign a promise to appear on the citation. So there's no question the officer is lying to you when he says, no, you're in an investigative detention. And most of them know they're lying. Now, the third question is, am I free to go? The officer should never be able to give you the same answer to question 2 and question 3. They're a complete contradiction. You can't be not under arrest and also not free to go. The main reason we ask that question is to set the stage to prove on the record that we are actually in a custodial arrest. The courts have ruled that when a reasonable individual feels that he is no longer free to leave of his own volition, that constitutes a custodial arrest. So we're trying to establish those facts in the record. Now, the fourth thing you can ask is very simple, or the fourth statement, actually. Officer, is there a recording being made of this incident? And generally they're going to tell you yes. And say, okay, then for the record, what I would like to tell you is, 1, I am not engaging in transportation or commercial use of the highways in any way, shape, or form. 2, I absolutely do not consent to being stopped for those purposes or any other purpose, unless you can show that I've violated some law other than allegedly a transportation law. By doing that, we're actually setting the stage for the argument that the officer was fully informed that he was attempting to regulate me in a manner that was inappropriate. I was not acting in the regulable activity of transportation or commerce, therefore his authority to act under those statutes didn't exist. It's very much like someone trying to hold you accountable under a commercial fishing statute when you live in Iowa and you've never been to the coast to commercially fish in your life.
Well, in your experience, I mean, I would imagine this would catch a lot of officers completely off guard and by surprise. Are they more likely to listen and do they get more angry, or do they listen to you?
That actually entirely depends upon the officer. Nowadays, you just don't know.
That's why I asked. I would imagine some of them would get a little...
Yeah, some of them will get agitated. They'll get downright angry in some cases simply because you are attempting to enforce your rights. They're going to start making demands. I told you I wanted your license, registration, and proof of insurance. But again, officer, 1, I believe I'm in a custodial arrest because I'm not free to leave. 2, is any of that information that you can use to either further charge me or use against me in a court of law? Now, the officer's going to he's really going to explode at this point, at least as far as an attitude, simply because he's used to being obeyed without question.
Sure.
That's what they want you to be. They want you to be submissive. They want us to be sheeple. And I decided a long time ago I was no longer going to be that. And
what about when they ask, they always want permission to search your vehicle?
Again, use of the term vehicle, I would not recommend.
Okay.
Search my car, search my conveyance, automobile, sure, but not a vehicle. Again, vehicle is a commercial term related to transportation. But as far as the power to search, again, if this is a warrantless arrest, therefore it would be a warrantless search. What is the officer's articulable probable cause to conduct that search?
Exactly.
The courts will allow the officer to search what they consider to be the passenger compartment of an automobile if you're inside the car, to ensure that the officer is safe from any attack by a weapon you may have hidden, which is my general rule and reason for when I'm pulled over, I immediately look for a private parking lot, a private driveway, somewhere other than the shoulder of the road to pull over. That serves multiple purposes. The first one being it does not give the officer the authority to tow the automobile. The only way he can tow the automobile is if he can show that it was obstructing the public traffic or was being seized for evidence.
Let me ask you this. What if it takes you a while to find that point when they accuse you of running from the police officer? I mean,
I turn on, if I know I don't have a place where I can pull over immediately, then I will turn on my flashers. I will decelerate my car to a point where there's no question that I'm not attempting to evade anyone.
Yeah,
I will wave in the rearview mirror.